Okay, welcome everyone to this ReWiRE session. I'm going to give you a few minutes just to join. Hopefully you've got a cup of tea or your lunch or something, because yeah, it is lunchtime after all, nearly. So we've got quite a few of you signed up today, which is slightly nerve-wracking, but hopefully me and Adrienne will be fine. Great. If you want to say hi in the chat, so your name, where you're from, name and serial number in the chat. You can tell a joke if you want. It's just a really nice way. So we normally do these sessions in Zoom meetings so that we can see your faces. But we had quite a lot of you sign up for this one. So we've done it in a webinar format. So it's not quite as informal as it might normally feel. Well, not for me anyway. So if you can, yeah, try and kind of keep the hustle going in the chat, that would be great. And if any of you have been waiting for the sun, apparently it's now arrived. So, and it's going to be here for 2 weeks, which is very exciting because I am now off next week. So I can't wait to see the sun. So I think it'd be good to get going now. No heat pump jokes, Madeline. You're renowned for your jokes now in storage. I think it's kind of, you should have them prepped for every session, which would be ace. Great. Okay, brilliant. So welcome everyone. I'm Rachel Hayes. I'm an Associate Director at Regen, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this ReWiRE session. So we've been running these lunchtime sessions on cutting edge issues of the energy transition. So today our lunchtime lowdown will be on the still anticipated heat and building strategy, which we are expecting soon from government. We had hoped with a little bit of insider knowledge that we'd have had the strategy out by now, but it's stuck with number 10, I think. So, but we decided to kind of press ahead today. I think there's a lot of interest in heat. There's a lot in the press at the moment. Most notably, the IEA last week were calling for no new gas boilers from 2025 in their report. So I think given perhaps leaky government, there is quite a bit kind of out in circulation. So I thought there's kind of maybe plenty for us to discuss on questions. At Regen, we've developed a lot of expertise in heat over the years. So my colleagues Mark and Johnny, most notably, have been producing some thought leadership papers. So we did our first paper last March on decarbonising heat, and that paper looked at the potential of heat decarbonisation pathways, the widespread of electrification, and the use of clean hydrogen as an alternative heating fuel. So that paper very much kind of argued that the solution is likely to be a combination of heating solutions, which are very kind of local and regional dependent. Obviously, you know, there's a huge variation between kind of rural off-gas grid properties and those on the gas network. We also did a second paper on rethinking heat, which looked at the deployment of heat pumps, and in particular around new business models for deploying heat pumps, which would enable flats and terraces and places that don't have large gardens, which are approximately 49% of the UK housing stock, to take up this type of technology. So that's quite a kind of specific paper around new business models for ground source heat pumps. We've also been engaged in innovation projects around whole house retrofit and energy efficiency. Mark and Tim have been working on ZebCat linked closely with the Energy Sprung model. And they're the pictures that, if you've seen them, with the really kind of cool, like pink and colourful houses, and they want houses that you love to live in. So I think if the colours are anything to go by, they look pretty swanky. My colleague Sophie, she also wrote a blog on International Women's Day around fuel poverty and the injustice of poor health and leaky homes, so that's definitely worth a read. So Hannah is hopefully going to drop all these in the chat so that you've got the links, and we'll definitely circulate any of the info around after on the Thanks for Coming email. My colleague, and finally, I guess my colleague Kerry, she's been seconded into Bristol City Council as part of the Heat Networks team. So she's been on the front line of delivering heat networks. So heat's been a big topic for us at Regen for a number of years now. So I guess focus on today, we're really keen to run a session focus on the heat and building strategy. The first of these lunchtime lowdown sessions that we did was very much around the net zero policy that had been coming out of government in the autumn. My colleague Madeline did a great job in kind of summarising and racing through everything from the 10-point plan to the national infrastructure strategy, and all of the kind of strategies that we're now expecting: the heat and building strategy, the hydrogen strategy, the net zero review from Treasury, and the net zero strategy are all kind of anticipated ahead of COP in November. So less than 6 months to go. Alok Sharma's speech last Friday on the 6 months to go, that window is getting smaller and smaller. So it'd be really good to see these strategies kind of making it out of government in time, so that we can all kind of start to get into the detail. I know we're really hungry for it. So hopefully Adrienne will have some answers for us today on some of those areas. The other reason I thought today was perhaps most important is I personally feel that the pandemic has really shown us the importance of home and having a safe and comfortable space, reducing some of the barriers to the uptake of low carbon heat. I think there's a huge opportunity for more than just carbon savings, such as improved comfort, smarter energy system, and a new and kind of vibrant jobs sector. So without any further ado, I'm delighted to be joined by Adrienne. She is Head of Long-Term Heat Transformation in the Clean Heat Directorate at BEIS, and she's going to talk us through some of the high-level ambitions and headlines in the heat and building strategy. So Adrienne, welcome to this ReWiRE session. How are you?
Thanks for having me.
So I just wanted to say these sessions are kind of more relaxed environment to kind of get under the key issues affecting the energy transition. But I'd like to start with today and getting to know you a little bit better. So it's a ReWiRE session, so it's mostly women in the audience. We do sometimes get a handful of men. But yeah, I'd like to kind of, talk to you about, how you ended up being head of long-term heat. Was that a lifelong ambition? And also as part of ReWiRE, we're really keen on getting more women and increasing the female representation in the sector and in policy forums. And I'd like to hear a little bit about your experience of being in BEIS with that kind of view. So welcome.
Okay. So first of all, thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited to be here, although it is a shame that it's not the kind of the heat and building strategy at the door and we can have the candid discussion that I would like, but that aside, I'm sure we can have lots of good conversations. So I started my career as a secondary science teacher, and I did that for about 6-7 years, and I quit that because I think if anyone's ever had experience in that field, or if anyone's got friends that are teachers, the burnout rate is quite high. And so I left that and I went to work at DFE. I was working on STEM, particularly looking at girls' participation in science, which is I'm very passionate about. And then obviously Brexit happened. DFE was one of the departments that was kind of least impacted by Brexit. So there was a huge mobilisation of civil servants to go and work on kind of really high profile kind of emerging policy. So I was mobilised as part of that. And I think it's probably fair to say that Brexit kind of changed the shape and the face of the civil service. I think there's a massive influx of much younger people coming in. So it felt, for me anyway, it felt like the civil service is quite different now. But obviously Brexit, I don't want to say is quite behind us yet. I know there's still a lot of stuff going on in that space, but we had this huge ramp up of staff moving, and obviously that ramp up moved down. And I was very aware that I'd done a lot of kind of project-based work. I moved around quite a lot, and I really wanted to find a policy area that was going to be a home, and that was something I felt very passionate about. I feel like with education, although I will always be really passionate about education, I'll always be really passionate about science education. I feel like I'd kind of looked at that problem to death. So I was keen for something new. I wanted something that I was going to feel passionate about, but I also wanted something that kind of took my science knowledge with me. And so, I applied for a job in BEIS, and I've been here for about, it's not huge lengths of time compared to some other people in the sector. I've been here for about a year now, but I feel very confident in saying, I think this is my home. I really enjoy working on the kind of climate space. I think it's so interesting. It's really interesting being on the inside. I think it makes me feel a bit more positive about climate change overall, kind of working working on it, which I guess that's a good thing. So yeah, I've not been here for, I'm not a lifer compared to some of the people that have been in BEIS, and I'm sure in your experience in this sector as well. But I think I'd like to be, which I'll take as a win.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Yeah, I didn't realise you were a science teacher before. That's new information. I imagine you're one of the really cool teachers as well. So
I will market myself as that. I don't think the kids would agree, but never mind.
Well, that's really interesting, and I think we're one of the things for ReWiRE is really keen on hearing people's personal stories. And do you see many, like the policy forums and the kind of sessions? Do you see, like, how is the kind of male female representation? Is that?
I definitely notice. So I think I'm probably at quite a strange level in the civil service where I work kind of, I think my time is probably equally split above me and below me, if you like. And I think in terms of I think the kind of above the line, above where I am now, it definitely does feel much more male dominated. And I think, internally, we obviously have, one of the things that I really love about the civil service is I think they're very aware of cultural problems that exist in the civil service, and I think they try really hard to correct them and to kind of work on making things better. And so diversity and inclusion is something we talk about a lot in the civil service, but I think we are very aware that actually we've probably got a bit more power that we can wield with organisations in terms of asking for a bit more diversity. And so I think that's something at a senior level we are very mindful of, but I think even at a kind of less senior level as well, I think we can do a bit more on asking for representation. And I think it's one of those things that probably in a lot of those organisations, I'm sure lots of women in the audience will know this feeling, is that I think there's probably a lot of men in those organisations that have never looked around the room and thought, this is a bit weird that there aren't that many women here. But obviously there's lots of women that have done that. And so I think that kind of, that trickle up, it is happening in some sectors. And actually, there've been a few instances where my bosses have been invited to panels, and the panels have come back and said, actually, we want a woman instead, which has been great. So there are a few instances of that happening. There's definitely still a problem there. We definitely can do more on it. And I think as BEIS, we need to tap into how we have that conversation in a meaningful way with organisations. I think we've not quite got it right yet, I think.
Yeah, no, it's a really important issue. So we're definitely, as part of the ReWiRE network, definitely encouraging any men to say no if they're invited to be on a manel. And I've also said to Charlotte, a previous colleague, she's now left, I've always encouraged her to kind of say in kind of BEIS meetings, like, actually we want 50-50 at least kind of gender balance in policy meetings, and she should down tools and walk out if it's not like that. Or so yeah, try and encourage more of that. Well, thanks, Adrienne. That's really helpful, kind of get a view on the kind of civil service. I'm also seconded now into the COP unit in the Cabinet Office, so I've got definitely a bit of a view from the inside as well. So I kind of share some of your experiences. Okay, so let's move on to heat, and I know you've prepped a few slides to talk us through the heat and building strategy, and then following that we'll move on to questions and then a bit more of a kind of chat and discussion. So do you want to kick off with a few slides?
Yeah, great. And just before I start, what I will say is I understand from talking to Rachel and colleagues that not everybody comes from a heat background. So what I'll hopefully do is a bit of a whistle-stop tour of the strategy. Obviously, hopefully not revealing anything that's kind of too sensitive. I'm sure that a lot of people will be aware that there's been various policies that have been trailed in the Energy White Paper and the 10-point plan. So some of the stuff might be stuff you already know, but hopefully what I will be able to do is set out some of how some of those policies hang together and what the context and the principles of heat transformation are. So that's what I'll intend to do. And obviously really, really happy to take questions at the end about specifics or kind of more general stuff. But okay, if you can move on to the next slide, please. Okay, so I'm assuming that most people in the audience have kind of some idea about the problem of heat. But roughly speaking, if that's not you, emissions from heat and heating buildings, depending on kind of how you cut the figures, but it's about 30% of UK emissions. So it's a really big problem, and it's probably, in my opinion, it's the one that people know the least about, and have got kind of least the kind of, I don't want to say the least desire, but the least knowledge on how to change things. So it's a really big problem in terms of carbon emissions, and it's a really big problem in terms of public engagement, I think. Although last couple of weeks, there's been a bit of a trickle down of headlines and things. So I think that's a real positive in a lot of respects. So some of the stuff that's already been trailed loosely, the kind of big headline areas are, in order to tackle heat in buildings, there's a couple of things we need to do. The first is we need to work on energy efficiency. So what that looks like is raising the energy efficiency in as many homes and buildings as possible to EPCC. You'll notice the keywords there: we're cost effective, we're practical, and we're affordable. So that I'll talk a bit more about flexibility in a moment, but that's not a kind of blanket one size fits all approach. We need to go to the heat pump market. Heat pumps are the technology right now that we think can be a kind of mass solution. They're the only one that's readily available right now to be a mass solution. So heat pumps are going to have a really critical role to play. So we need to grow the market there and make them both a more appealing offer, a kind of more affordable offer, but also just make sure that we've got the supply chains in place so that if anybody wants to buy a heat pump now, they are able to. We've got expanding the use of heat networks. So heat networks, they're quite a niche, kind of a niche heat solution in the UK at the moment. They're not in other countries, particularly in Europe. And CCC have said they think the kind of heat network solution needs to kind of grow from about 2% to 20%. So that's an area where we really want to expand. Kind of pillar 4, if you like, is about an R&D program to make sure that we are continuing to invest in the research and development for the safety and the feasibility of hydrogen. And there's lots of stuff in that space, which I'll talk about in a bit more detail in a sec. And then finally, the kind of last pillar of the strategy is about making sure that we are enabling ourselves to be in a position to take decisions about the future of heating, roughly by about the middle of the decade. Okay, next slide, please. Great, thank you. So obviously, those kind of 5 pillars that I've set out, if you will, they come with a whole host of challenges, and I'm sure I'll get asked about some of the challenges once I've kind of finished going through these slides. But just to kind of talk about what I see as some of the biggest things we need to contend with. These are not in any particular order, but obviously capital costs are a really big one. So there's kind of 2 lenses to look at that through. One is the consumer lens, about how we make stuff more affordable and more appealing for homeowners, for people who are working in small buildings, and kind of the individual. And the other is, how do we think about, on the bigger scale, about leveraging private investment, about getting money into areas where there might be new manufacturing plants, where there's going to be these kind of real areas of growth. So we need to think about it both at a kind of individual level and at a kind of through that kind of big business lens as well. I've already mentioned this already about the need to grow supply chains. Right now, a lot of our technologies are quite immature, so we really need to kind of grow those out to make sure that our energy efficiency market, our low carbon heat supply chains are as attractive as they can be, and that they are going to deliver the economies of scale that we want and need in future. Linked to that, so it's not just about the kind of the parts and the tech, it's also about the people that put in the parts and the tech. Skills, growing that kind of skills chain is really important. There's 2 aspects to that, and I'm sure you'll have kind of seen newspaper articles where it's talking about kind of the jobs and the kind of the economic benefits that can come from a kind of green revolution. But there's 2 strands to that. One is that we've already got a lot of workers in a fossil fuel space. We need to make sure that we're just not writing them off. We need to kind of make sure that they are reskilled, retrained, and brought over to a kind of green economy. And also it's about making sure that we're getting entrants into green economies as well, into green jobs. So there's 2 ways of looking at that skills problem. And the kind of final point there about that that needs to benefit every area of the country. So we need to make sure that, you know, we're going to need change across the UK. We need to make sure that we've got people in place across the UK to deliver that change. A big one is how costs fall and how change happens to different groups in different ways. So we need to make sure that that change is going to happen in a way that is fair and just to everyone, recognizing that the problems that we look at now are not going to be the same problems that we're looking at in 2050 or 2045, 2050. So those problems are going to iterate as time goes on, and we're going to need to kind of have a flexible and agile approach to how we address those problems as they emerge. The kind of final point here is about the cumulative impact. So I'm obviously talking about heat, but heat is not the only sector that's decarbonising. Transport, industry, kind of aviation, lots of things like that are decarbonising as well. And all of those decarbonisation pathways are going to have an impact on the energy system as a whole. So we've got to think about heat in line as think about everything else. And so what those challenges have led to is a kind of underpinning set of principles, if you like, that we want to guide the heat transformation into 2050. So the first is really relating to the kind of bottom point about that cumulative impact. And the first is that we need to make sure we're taking a whole building approach and a whole systems approach. The whole systems approach is thinking about how actions in the home or actions in the workplace will impact on the electricity grid, the gas grid, etc. And think about the whole buildings approach is really about making sure that the building is doing what you need it to do. The building is efficient, the building is suited for low carbon heating, and that we're kind of preventing massive disruption and massive cost to consumers when we're kind of undertaking action on the buildings. Driving no regrets action, I'll talk a little bit more about that, but basically that the priority for the start of this decade is to make sure that we are acting in a way that will set us up for mass transformation. So we're doing the kind of the stuff that will be needed in any situation, and that's really where the priorities for the beginning of the decade need to sit. Principle 3, targeting the fabric of the building and the worst first. It's really making sure that, you know, there's no point installing a snazzy new low carbon heat system if your building still leaks and is really cold and drafty. So it's making sure that we are thinking about the fabric of the building in conjunction with low carbon heating. And we're also making sure that we're targeting our worst performing, our leakiest, our coldest buildings first. And that will offer benefits not only in terms of kind of health and well-being of the occupants of the building, but also in carbon savings as well. And finally, and I say finally, but I think this is probably the thing that we will, that comes up the most and rightly, is about how you support the most vulnerable through the transition. I think in heating, in a way, we've kind of already got kind of a nifty group that are already labelled as people that live in fuel poverty. And other sectors don't necessarily have that kind of pre-identified group. But I think that, you know, people in fuel poverty are not going to be the only people that are vulnerable throughout this change. And we need to make sure that we're keeping an eye on and keeping a broad, keeping an open mind about who might be vulnerable in the transition. So sometimes when people, I find anyway, that sometimes when I talk about the most vulnerable, I talk about people in fuel poverty. But I think it's really important to recognise that actually it might be broader than that. And that group might change as we move on to the transition, as we kind of move through different stages of the transition. Okay, next slide, please. So I mentioned this previously. The big action for the beginning of this decade is all about driving action that's going to be needed in any scenario, and making sure that that action that we do now will set us on a pathway for mass transformation. So obviously that's about kind of making short-term carbon gains, but it's also about making sure that we are in as good a position we can be, ready to kind of switch over the majority of consumers from natural gas to low carbon heating. And the key point for me here is that we don't know yet what the optimal mix of technology will be. I think there are some people that will be expecting the heat and building strategy to say, this is the answer. We don't say that. The jury's still out for some of this stuff. You know, heat pumps as a technology are a relatively immature market in the UK. they are kind of cost prohibitive in a lot of instances. So we need to do some really urgent work there. But likewise, the safety case for hydrogen is still being worked up. So we're not in a position now to say this is the best option, this is the cheapest, most consumer-friendly option. We've still got kind of balls in the air to try and figure out what we need to do in that space. So it's not about saying right now it's going to be this or that, or it's going to be this in this area and that in that area. It is about saying, let's keep both of those technologies on the table. Let's make both of those technologies as attractive as they can be. And tied into that, there's a few things to kind of talk about. The first one is we really need to make sure that we are growing our supply chains. And I'll talk a little bit more about how we do that in a moment. So growing our supply chains for heat pumps, growing our supply chains for heat networks. We need to make sure that we are doing things like targeting the worst buildings first and investing in energy efficiency and the fabric of our buildings to make sure that whatever heating solution is right in the long term, that heating solution is being installed in a building that's already efficient and not drafty, not cold, not leaky. So there's a few things that we need to do now to put us on that path. Can we go on to the next slide please? And so again, so kind of guiding principles, if you like, there's been a lot of headlines in the last couple of weeks about things that government is planning to do, and some of them are quite sensationalist, I think. The key kind of principles, I think, for the heat and building strategy in the kind of 2020s is about minimizing disruption, keeping consumer choice in play, working with the growing of the market, working with natural trigger points, looking at kind of boiler replacements when buildings change hands and things like that. So we're really looking at how we can add in how we can bring in changes, but doing it in a way that's kind of the least disruptive to consumers. We'll also, regulations will have to change. They'll have to make sure that we're moving in a general direction of kind of phasing out fossil fuels and phasing in low carbon. And so minimum standards are going to change. And those minimum standards are kind of in two ways. One is like gearing us up for that kind of switch out of fossil fuel systems, but it's also about making sure that we're raising the standard of our buildings. I've mentioned this before. Again, it's really important, preparing the market, growing technologies, making sure that those technologies are ready and available to be deployed at scale when we need them. And finally, I think this is a really important one, is about leading by example. And there's two benefits to that. Number one, public sector buildings are buildings that we all benefit from. So, government taking action, decisive action in public sector is really great for everyone. It's great for society. But the other thing, the really important thing, is it's really great to start kind of boosting supply chains and boosting that demand now. So that is a real key area now that we want to kind of grow action in the 2020s. Next slide, please. So this is just really, I'll kind of whip through these very quickly, but this is just really looking at the technology that is going to get us to 2050 and net zero. So energy efficiency, I've obviously mentioned a lot. There are around 17 million properties at the moment that are below EPCC. So, in terms of houses that are well insulated and stay warm and aren't ramping up massive fuel bills, we've actually got quite a lot of work to do there. So we know that we've got a lot of buildings now that are going to need to be treated between now and 2050. And that will have benefits in terms of reducing fuel bills overall, but that will also make sure that those buildings are as suitable as can be for particular low carbon heating solutions. So energy efficiency is an absolute priority between now and 2050. Move on to the next slide, please. Heat pumps, as I've said, they are the kind of large scale solution that's on offer right now, but it's quite a nascent market in the UK. So we really need to grow the supply chains. And there's a few ways of doing that, and they all need to work in conjunction with each other. One is that we need to kind of make sure that we are talking to industry in the right way and galvanizing them and giving them clear signals that they should be investing in this market now and growing their manufacturing, etc. One is that we need to kind of think about where we take low regrets and how we how we kind of build on action. So there's some things in here like, you know, new builds, they're quite an easy win right now. So is there stuff that we can do there to make sure that they're kind of really critical in growing the heat pump market? Other things are, you know, they're looking at things like off-gas grid. We know that that's unlikely to be a hydrogen solution in the future. So actually that's quite a low regrets area right now. Moving on to the next slide. Heat networks, I said at the beginning, heat networks are quite a small solution right now. They're about 2% of our kind of heat landscape. We need to grow those. The CCC said to about 18% of the market share. We've got quite a lot of work to do in that space, and that's not only about the kind of delivery of it, but it's also about making sure that people can access funding and they know where the best places are for heat networks. So there's a program of work around expanding heat networks as well. And then next slide, please. Hydrogen is obviously the big disruptor in this space. We know that hydrogen's got a really important role to play in net zero. It's going to have uses in industry. It's going to have uses in heavy transport. Obviously, that test case is still being built for heat, but that while we think that is a solution, it makes a lot of sense to continue to invest in R&D in that space. And so there's lots of things going on. Some of it's looking at transmission and CCUS and things like that. Some of it's looking at how appliances work in buildings, and some of it's looking at actually how you would convert the grid. So there are kind of appliance demonstrator projects going on. And there's also plans for a hydrogen village trial and a hydrogen neighbourhood as well. And that work will continue until we are in a position to say, yep, hydrogen works for heating, or no, hydrogen is not the right solution. And then the final slide, which I think, again, this goes back to my point that I think a lot of people will be expecting the heat and building strategy to give an answer about what 2050 looks like for the UK. And we're not in a position to do that yet. And I think, you know, I'll be really honest with you here. I think there'll be a lot of people that will be quite frustrated by that. But the flip side of that coin is it makes a lot of sense to me now to take our time with that decision, take our time to do the cost benefit analysis, make sure the safety case is proved, allow for the heat pump market to grow and make heat pumps a more attractive technology. There's a lot of logic in that now in order to make sure that when we are making a decision in the mid-2020s, that we're making that decision from a really informed evidence base. And the thing to say there as well, I think people that work in this sector, I think will have heard this kind of decision in the middle of the decade. I think that probably hides a bit of a multitude of sins there. I don't think there is one decision that sets out, right, in 2050 we'll all be on hydrogen, or in 2050 we'll all have heat pumps. I don't think that decision exists per se, but I think where we need to be in the middle of the decade is understanding how decisions might be made for particular groups of people, for particular buildings, for particular regions, and how those decisions would come about and how they would be kind of worked through from a really solid evidence base, thinking about economics, thinking about people, and thinking about the kind of technology itself. I will pause there. I think that was hopefully very whistle stop, but hopefully enough to give you a flavour of what the approach to the strategy is. So I'll pause and hand back to you, Rachel.
Well, thanks, Adrienne. That's really good. It's nice to have a kind of overview of your kind of thinking around clean heat and what that means and what the opportunities and the challenges are. I think I'm definitely hearing the jury is still out. The kind of, you're thinking about kind of low regret options. I can hear my colleague Johnny ringing in the background saying, you know, least regret scenario, what decisions can we make now? So yeah, really interesting to kind of hear your take on, you know, you wanting the supply chains to ramp up, but I guess the kind of flip side of that is RHI coming to an end in March 2022, and then the Clean Heat Grant not necessarily being substantial enough and only being a kind of 2-year time frame. And obviously, you know, I think as an industry, we've, you know, learned the lessons from Green Homes Grant and those kind of short-term policy incentives that really do prevent the market from investing and upskilling and recruiting and, you know, getting up to size in order to we really want to kind of avoid that boom and bust scenario. So you know, I know you guys have been, you know, we've made that case to you many times, and I know others have too. I just wanted to kind of kick off the discussion. So Regen, we recently did a open letter to the Minister with our kind of key asks for the heat and buildings strategy. So just going to read through those. So the one is to implement a long-term funded support scheme for energy efficiency and heat decarbonisation retrofit, which avoids the boom and bust cycles created by past initiatives and provides long-term support and confidence for the industry and consumers. So it's kind of the point I made just now. Two, kind of address the distortion of environmental levies being paid on low carbon electricity bills by implementing a carbon levy scheme based on the carbon intensity of heating fuels, which also support consumer adoption and low carbon heating solutions. Three, give local authorities responsibility for planning for heat decarbonisation and energy efficiency with control over funding, including eco. Four, continue support for whole house retrofit approaches through funding schemes and incentive mechanisms. Five, to continue or to introduce support for ground arrays based on utility finance model, enabling the uptake of ground source heat pumps. And then finally, number 6, banning of fossil fuel heating in off-gas grid properties by 2026. So I guess my first question is, can I go back to Madeline or Merlin and say, you know, we've got a win in the strategy for any of those? Do you want to come back on any of those particular points?
So some of those things are kind of really, really high up the agenda, and there's a couple of, you know, the criticism that we get the most often is about you know, the Green Homes Grant and how that was rolled out, and also where's the long-term funding. I think on the Green Homes Grant point in particular, you know, that met with a lot of criticism, and the flip side of that is there are actually a lot of really good lessons that were learned from that, and I think I don't want to say in a way it was great that it wasn't the kind of thing that we wanted it to be, because we've learned lots of lessons. That's obviously really facetious, but I think there's a lot of learning from that will hopefully set us on the right course in future. I think it is a really big criticism, and it's not a criticism at the moment that there is an answer to, but I think that there is a lot of sympathy for that at a political level. So I can't say, oh, don't worry, there's this solution. What I will say though is obviously Green Homes Grant, RHI, Clean Heat Grant, lots of areas like that, they're only one part of it. We've got kind of local delivery schemes and ECHO, and so there are different mechanisms, but I do appreciate there is still this kind of able to pay sector that is they're kind of left out in the cold a little bit at the moment. And so I think it's a really fair criticism. I think it's a criticism that people are aware of. The other one that you raised about the kind of energy price distortion, again, that's a really, really big issue for us. We'll be consulting this year about, you know, what reform in that space looks like. And I think that's going to be really critical, because, you know, that kind of the market price distortion at the moment, which puts kind of costs on electricity and not on gas, is prohibitive to make that kind of that early switch to an electric heat pump, for example. But obviously, as and when prices do shift, if that is what the kind of consultation comes to, I'm sure there's going to be a kind of an interim where some people are quite adversely hit by any changes. So I think there's a kind of long term, it really does make sense to kind of address that imbalance, but we also need to make sure we're thinking about the short term as well, and make sure that we've worked all of that policy through. So I think those are the kind of two big ones that I think are really very much in our consciousness right now. I'm trying to think, just refresh my memory, what were the other few points you raised?
So the one around banning gas boilers banning new fossil fuel heating in off-gas grid properties, and then also a kind of a support for shared ground arrays based on utility finance model to increase the uptake of ground source heat pumps.
So actually, on the point about banning fossil fuels, I think, you know, I think there's obviously been lots of stuff trailed in the press about this in the last couple of weeks. I think that the language that we use around there about whether there's a kind of hard ban, backstop, whatever, compared to the implicit, we know that in 2050 we need to completely move away from natural gas boilers or fossil fuel boilers. I don't necessarily think we've landed anywhere that's kind of quite concrete yet, but I think the implication is still the same. And I think, we do know off-gas grid is an area for low regret. We need to make sure as well, though, that when we're thinking about how we treat off-gas grid, that we're thinking about it in terms of the wider housing context as well. A lot of those buildings are some of the worst performing PC buildings. So making sure that actually we're not bringing in a hard backstop for properties without making sure there's a real solution on the table as well. I think that's going to be really important going forward. And your final point, which is a point that I did not talk about in my slides, not because it's not important, just because I didn't mention it for some reason, about finance, is I spoke a lot about growing markets, and I spoke about growing the heat pump market and growing the energy efficiency market. Market that I didn't talk about was green finance. Mm-hmm. We think that green finance has got such an important role to play, and it kind of goes back to your point about subsidies and incentives. I think there's a lot of people that would kind of say, government, you need to pay for this transition. Government is going to put in a lot of money for that transition. It will need to put in money to protect fuel poor consumers or other vulnerable consumers. It's going to need to put in money for public sector and things. Also going to need to put in money for a lot of big infrastructure as well. Mm-hmm. So I think there's going to be a lot of government money going into the transition. I think that on the consumer angle, I think that whilst there's a lot of people that think government should just stump up the cash, I think that's unrealistic. What I think we need to do is make sure that we're not just looking at it as people in fuel poverty and able to pay, that we are really thinking about what is an attractive option for people that are able to pay. Because as we discussed yesterday, Rachel, able to pay, they might be people that are not on the breadline and don't live in poor, fuel poor housing. But they might not be people that have got 15 grand sitting around ready to pay for a heat pump. And so making sure that we are catering to those people and giving them real options that is not going to bankrupt them in the near term or in the long term is really important. At the moment, I don't think we've got that market yet. I think there have been some really interesting signs in kind of recent months, but I think there's a lot more work to do to make sure that is actually an attractive offer for people and not just something that's really burdensome.
Definitely. I know I mentioned my personal experience yesterday of having a leaky oil boiler being off gas grid, and I'm really passionate about not replacing it with an oil boiler, and so I've had quotes for heat pumps, and they're coming in at like 20 to 25k with me having to do my own groundworks, and a single income household, like actually I don't have a spare 20-25k sloshing about. Surprisingly, you might be surprised to hear that, but it's really hard. And I think the RHI calculations look quite attractive, relatively speaking, if you've got that money to get the payback, between, I think I've been quoted something like between 11 and 16k in terms of RHI payback over the 7-year period. But then when you compare that to the clean heat grant of 4k up front that you might get, there's just no way that that kind of the blunt instrument, I guess, can kind of cope. You could cope with that. So if you're forced to make that decision and off gas areas where you kind of have to kind of bite the bullet, I guess there's got to be some kind of incentive there or some kind of encouragement. I think tying having the clean heat grant is a solution for the future, but I think that is there any kind of aspiration to make that different for different technologies? It feels like quite a blunt instrument at the moment, obviously, and it's only a 2-year period.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really fair criticism, and I must kind of hold my hands up here and say, I really am a jack of all trades and master of absolutely none. So I think there is a lot of work going on in the kind of grant space at the moment. looking at how much money is available, looking at the technology that it should be available for. Because I know I don't know whether, well, I say I know. I was going to say I'm sure everyone knows, but probably not everybody does. Is that one of the things that's made getting the heat and building strategy out the door really difficult is because it's so cost-cutting, it's so broad. People want to hang lots and lots of different things on it and put lots and lots of different things in it, and using it to talk about the kind of full range of all of the different technologies that exist in this space. And that's not only heating technologies, but that's energy efficiency technologies, smart digital technologies, and a whole host of other stuff. So I know that kind of a problem when we design grants is like what's in scope and what's out of scope. So things like, we always get asked questions about things like, are solar PV in scope? Is that out? Or, are there other, biomass solutions in scope or out of scope? And actually trying to design those grants in a way that benefits, you'd like it to benefit everyone, but also ensures that we are pulling in a common direction is actually really, really difficult. And I think what you said about it's a blunt instrument, I think that's really fair. Whether or not it moves to kind of different tech specific things in future, I don't know, but I think your critique is right, and I think that making sure that in future those grants are not only financially attractive and they actually do something about making the cost going from not just from prohibitive to less prohibitive, but from prohibitive to actually this is affordable now. We can actually talk about this as a solution. I think there's a big challenge there, and I think there's a big challenge in terms of making sure that the public is pulling in the right direction. And I think this will probably chime with some people that work in this space already. I think there's a lot of people that are still stuck in the hydrogen versus heat pumps technology, hydrogen versus heat pumps dialogue, and actually playing those two things off against each other, I don't think is particularly helpful, because the reality is we're probably going to need both. There's not like one building that we need to aim for to kind of be able to kit out. We need to think about the range of building types in the UK, the range of technologies that is needed, and we need to make sure that we are not lumbering residents and kind of small business owners with massive bills or giving them kind of technologies that won't work in their houses. And so flexibility is really important, and I think that needs to feature in the grant process as well. And I think probably right now there's more we can do there.
Yeah, I think it's a hugely complex area. I can see why you're struggling to get it out the door, and I can see different things wanting to be hung on it in terms of the importance of energy efficiency and the importance of home as well. It's such a personal thing for people to make changes in their home, and I think that's grouping some of the questions that we've had come in on the chat and the Q&A together, like consumer confidence and consumer behaviour, and encouraging people to make this transition. I know the consumer behaviour insights team in BEIS have got a kind of post-COP kind of plan of engagement, but what kind of things are you thinking, Adrienne, in terms of helping the uptake of heat, and what that might look like?
I've actually had this conversation this morning, actually. So it's a really, really good question. It's a really interesting one because obviously a Tory government is very much about industry kind of leading the way. And I think that's really, really important that industry we know that likely the person that installs your boiler is likely to be more trusted than central government, for example, in advising you about what heating solution you should have in your home. But I think that just saying, industry, you do the work and we'll just sit back and, I don't want to say sit back and do nothing, that's obviously inaccurate, but just outsourcing it all to industry, I don't think is quite right either. And I think there's a lot, I think one of the things we need to make sure we're doing is that we have a really good understanding as central government who is best to talk to people and bring them on this journey. That might not be central government, that might be local government, that might be industry, that might be agencies, kind of small independent advisors. And maybe it's something that we need where you know, in the same way that you have money supermarkets to go and look for your car insurance, maybe you need a similar thing for your kind of heating solution. And, you know, those services exist now. We've got the SEA, which is an impartial advice service. It's not very well known. Probably need to do a bit more work to kind of put that kind of information in the public, consciousness. So I think there's the balance between who needs to be doing what, I think, is not clear right now. But I think there is a role for everyone. And I think, again, that's another one. Public engagement is it's a very divisive topic. And I think there's a lot of people who say government should do more. And there's a lot of people who think industry, you are better placed to lead. So I don't think there's an easy answer. I think that particularly in the heat space, because this is one of the very few areas in net zero where we have genuine optionality. So I think there's a caution about saying to people now, kind of setting out kind of really clear guidance or advice or advertising now about what's needed, because we don't know. So, you know, if you were going to go hell for leather on advertising heat pumps, and then actually hydrogen is actually what's needed in, I don't know, XYZ cities, that's obviously not money well spent. So there's kind of a lot of focus on, should we be looking at small changes right now? Should we be looking at things like homeowners? What can you do about your energy efficiency? Should we be looking at, you know, what's the kind of optimum temperature for your thermostat? That kind of thing. So should we be looking for those short wins, or should we be kind of thinking about eyes on the prize? Let's look at 2050. How do we get there? And there's a discourse around it at the moment. As you alluded to, there are people working on that at the moment, but it's one that, again, it is divisive. And I don't think we're quite at a point yet, both within central government and kind of with industry and local actors as well, where we're all quite pulling in the same direction. So I think we've got some work to do to try and unpick that a little bit further.
Definitely. I think my personal view on that is certainly that you need some kind of top-down guidance from government, but you also need that local approach, but bottom-up approach from community energy groups. And I think of the great work that Brighton and Hove community do. And I know full well, if they were given some of the Green Homes Grant money, or if West Midlands were given some of the eco money, they could actually do some fantastic things with that locally and make a huge difference. So I don't think there is one solution. I don't think it is just a Whitehall top-down approach and, you know, job done. I really believe that you do trust your installer, you trust your community energy group, you have those kind of trusted intermediaries, and they have a role to play. And I think, you know, Conservative government is big business, big solution. And I think hydrogen does fit quite well with that narrative. But, you know, hydrogen is unbelievably expensive, and, you know, some of the analysis we've done at Regen, it isn't looking like such a high grade product should really be pumped into the gas network. And I know many of the gas networks think it should, and they're doing quite a good job on lobbying. You know, I've seen a lot of stuff coming from them, and yes, but it's, you know, I don't necessarily think that's the right solution. You know, I think we don't know that, but, you know, if we have such a high grade product which is expensive to produce, you know, it's not really comparable to natural gas coming into our homes to cook our eggs on, if you want to use Boris's phrase.
Yeah, it's a very interesting one, because obviously I sit in meetings where I kind of hear both sides of the coin, and I think on a personal level, I think I go through phases with it where sometimes I'm really like, heat pumps are the solution, and sometimes I'm like, hydrogen's the easy answer, and sometimes I'm smack bang in the middle, where I think actually, you know, the kind of tempered civil servant line, which is both of them have a role to play. And sometimes I think, yeah, that is right, but I think the reality about both of them have a role to play is because neither of them are perfect, and that's what makes this so hard. And I think you know, that's another reason why it's we've seen some of the sensationalist headlines that we've seen. It's because, as you say, Rachel, homes are really personal. This stuff is really challenging. You're not doing a like for like swap, and you're not even doing a like for like swap. And yes, the like for like swap is a bit more expensive, but some of this stuff, you're talking about a complete systems and house overhaul in order to make that work. That's really uncomfortable for a lot of people. And I think, I don't know, that we've got two imperfect solutions right now. Can we make those two imperfect solutions more more perfect and more workable. Undoubtedly, I think there's definitely room for both of them to get better and more appealing. But I also think that part of it is actually kind of the public, and I say the public, but with the recognition that we've got a responsibility here to kind of have that conversation. I think there's a kind of, we need to be adult about this. If this is a massive problem, if it was easy, we would have solved it. This is hard. There is going to be some hard choices here. There are going to need to be some behaviour changes. There's going to need to be some disruption. I think that kind of thing, at the moment, it does feel, from this kind of small amount of press that's happened because, the heat and building strategy isn't out yet, has been very much around, let's look at all of the negatives rather than actually, let's look at the prize here. And the prize here is that you hit net zero. Yeah. That's massive. So I think your point is absolutely right. I don't think there's not an easy answer there.
No, I don't think it's easy. And I don't think you're going to find a perfect solution. I don't think you should even try and find a perfect solution. I think there's so much ambition from, regular people like you and I in our kind of homes to address net zero, to engage in COP, and kind of the groundswell of kind of activity this year, I think will really raise the profile of what it means to net zero. And it does mean difficult decisions for both government and for people in their homes. And I think, we've got to make some compromises. Like, it can't all be kind of plain sailing. And if we've got to dig up all the spare rooms and put radiators in and stuff, then, that is a challenge, I think. I saw an interesting report, we're not going to have time to touch on it, I don't think, from the Green Finance Institute on the kind of link with mortgages, and I know you've got a consultation out on that, but perhaps linking some of those developments around it, and you think about installing a heat pump in the same way you would an extension, perhaps that's an opportunity moving forward.
Yeah, there's lots of interest in there's lots of interest at the moment in how you can galvanize different sectors to work. And look at things like the rental sector, or the kind of socially housed sector, is really quite heavily regulated at the moment. It is regulated more so than the owner-occupied sector, and the owner-occupied sector is, in terms of EPC rating, those are some of the worst buildings in the UK. And so there needs to be something that kicks in there to really raise the bar and make those properties suitable for low carbon heating. At the moment, we don't have the mechanism, and we're going to need to figure out what that is. And so I think it's thinking about how you kind of look at the whole broad brush of the building stock, because it's not, I said owner occupiers, and in my mind I was thinking in houses, but actually there's owner occupiers in the business space as well. And so I think like the range of products that's needed is going to be massive. And I think, if I'm sure there are kind of bankers and finance houses that are like, this is our opportunity to make some money here. But at the moment, that's quite a nascent market. And I think thinking about what's needed for who, by when they need it, what's the best, is it upfront money to buy a heat pump? Is it, a bit more money on your mortgage so you can retrofit it? I think there's a range of solutions that, I think in 10 years' time, our kind of green finance offer will be infinitely better than it is now. But right now, it does feel like there's a lot of kind of soft words and not necessarily much kind of, this is what you need to do in this space. Let's crack on and do it. And I think part of that is because it's a bit unknown still. But I think part of that as well is because, again, it's people's homes. You've got to tread softly, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we are coming to a close, Adrienne. So it's been really lovely to have you as part of this. And I guess the idea of these lunchtime sessions is to give kind of a short kind of 1 hour session over lunch where we can kind of get into the detail of some of the key issues affecting the energy transition for our ReWiRE network. So it's been really lovely to have you. It's a shame I couldn't see everyone's faces today as well. So but it's been brilliant to chat. So that just leaves me to kind of close and say thank you everyone for participating. The chat's been brilliant today. Adrienne, I'll send you a copy of the chat and the Q&A as well, so you can you've got that for your kind of stakeholder engagement. You can capture that. So thank you everyone, and have a safe trip back to the kitchen.
Thanks so much, Rachel. Thanks everyone.